Alright, step one is going to be removing the negative terminal from your battery. Okay, now you're going to disconnect your positive terminal and your strut brace if you have one. Okay, now you're going to open the wiring harness loom and set the harness aside. After you do that, remove the cabin air filter and housing. You're going to need a T30. I'm going to go ahead and throw up an image that points out all 4 T30 bolts. To disconnect the fan, you're going to remove the push pin on the right and the T25 bolt on the left. Then you're also going to disconnect the sensor. Once that's done, go ahead and just pull up and out. And then after that, you're going to remove the airbox. To do that, there are 2 10mm bolts on the right, and then just disconnect the mass airflow and pull up and out. Loosen the clamp on the upper intake boot, then remove the vacuum line connection, and make sure you also disconnect the mass airflow sensor before pulling off the upper boot. There is the upper T40 bolt and then the lower T40 bolt on the disc valve. You're also going to disconnect the sensor and then simply remove it. It can be tricky to get out, so just kind of work at it. Make sure you do not put too much stress on the butterfly valve. When I first bought the car, I upgraded the disc valve. Mine was broken and it's a common failure, so this one comes with a aluminum butterfly valve and a steel rod that goes all the way through. Definitely worth the 50 bucks. So pull the purge valve off the bracket, loosen the electrical connector box. There are 3 bolts holding it in place. Also, don't forget to disconnect the idle control valve. Loosen the upper hose clamp and the bottom hose clamp. The upper one's connected to the idle control valve and the bottom one's connected to the throttle body. After that, go ahead and spray a little bit of silicone at the end of each, and it's going to make it much easier to just pop right off. Okay, so now we're going to need to remove the power steering bracket. There's 2 bolts, and then we're just going to set it to the side. After that, we're going to be removing the air distributor. There's 4 T20 bolts that run down it. Cut the CCV hose free from the distributor and then cap the bottom of the connector. I used the razor blade. It was the easiest method possible. This is the new CCV hose that comes in the kit. Here is the large vacuum cap you're going to need to cap the bottom of that connection, and it comes with the hose clamp. Now replace this vacuum line here with the one in the kit that has a check valve. Ensure that it is pointed towards the engine. Okay, once that line is sliced, you're going to feed it underneath the intake manifold, and then you're going to go ahead and cap that. Now remove the cut line from the CCV, and we're going to be reusing the connection on the new line. To remove it, you're going to push in and turn left. That is what it looks like underneath the intake manifold. Slice down on the old line and pop the connector off. Hit it with some silicone and then push it onto the new hose. To install it back on the CCV, you're going to have to push in and turn right. It is opposite of when you removed it. Leave the hose full length for now. It's going to get cut and attached to the brass fitting on the snail pipe. Spray the O-rings on the air distributor with silicone to make sure they fit in nice, and then alternate your pattern of tightening the bolts to even the clamping force. Remove the long 10mm bolt underneath the oil filter housing. It will be replaced by the till bar. Now mount the L-shaped bracket. You're going to be using that long 10mm bolt. It has a spacer on it. The till bar is going to be used to basically adjust the camber of the supercharger. Depending on your vehicle setup, it may or may not need to be used, but we need to install it now in case you do. The bracket's going to be facing towards the engine. You're going to have the entire tow bar set up, installed. If you don't, you're not going to be able to connect it later on. Now remove the old power steering bracket. We're going to be installing the new one provided in the kit. The difference is the new one has only one leg, and it's going to allow for more clearance. Alright, so next we're going to be cutting the power steering line. So you're going to slice it at the base of it to get it off there, and then you're also going to cut it at the bottom so that we can put in the L-shaped fitting and then route it around and back underneath the supercharger. And don't forget to drain the fluid and use a bag to cover up the alternator. I got this section of heater hose from AutoZone, and then I got the L-shaped fitting from Home Depot. You're also going to need some hose clamps, and then a razor blade, the bolt that mounts the bracket, and then the bolt that mounts the actual reservoir, and also some silicone. And I made a paper towel plug for the bottom of the reservoir. And there you have it. My line started to crack, so I used some RTV and then I let it cure. I'm going to leave the line full length for now, and I will cut and trim it when it comes time to do the final reservoir installation. Moving on to the extension of the mass airflow sensor, you're going to need the wires in the kit, some heat shrink tubing, a solder gun with some solder, a heat gun or a lighter, a pair of wire cutters, a pair of strippers, and a razor blade.
Pick a location, cut it. Wrong wires.
Now go ahead and slice down on the wire sleeve to expose the mass airflow wires inside. The ground wire on the vehicle is black, and in the kit the ground wire is brown. Ensure that you are soldering light colored wires. Don't forget that the new ground color is brown that the kit provides, and the stock one on the vehicle is black. Also, as you can tell, the Harbor Freight solder gun I got was not the best. Activate the heat shrink tubing using the heat gun, or you can use a lighter if you prefer that method. Mass airflow sensor complete. We're going to be installing this vacuum line that I'm awkwardly holding. Remove this vacuum cap from the back of the manifold. It will expose the nipple, and then you will slide the vacuum line onto it. Silicone always helps. This end will be attached to the nipple. Make sure the line's fully back on the manifold. Go ahead and use your left hand, it makes it a lot easier. Moving on to upgrading the tensioner, you're going to have to remove the serpentine belt by using this tensioner. But before you can remove that, you're going to have to remove the AC belt. To do that, you're going to have to use this tensioner down here. That tensioner is going to need a 16mm socket. You will also need a T50 for this tensioner. And then once the belts are off, we can go ahead and remove that old tensioner and upgrade it. Now we're going to be removing the tensioner. There's two 13mm bolts. One's at the 11 o'clock and the other's at the 5. I wasn't paying attention, but make sure you take the idler pulley off first. It is a 16mm. You won't be able to take off the actual belt tensioner without it. This will be one of the bolts you replace for connecting the bracket itself to the engine. This longer bolt won't be reused, but this smaller one will. The new tensioner provided in the kit will also have the second bolt you're going to need to mount the new tensioner. For a side-by-side comparison, you can tell that the old one has a shock absorber and the new one does not. Also, don't forget to remove the old bracket. Now to prepare the bracket for installation, you're first going to have to install the supercharger to the bracket. The outlet will be facing the driver side wheel well. Now we're going to have to install these pulleys. So one is going to go right here and the other one's going to go right there. You're going to install that one first and then install the bracket itself before you can install the second one. There's the longer 160 mil, which is going to be for the base, and then the shorter 130 mil, which is going to be for the top. You'll also need to remove the bottom bolt for the alternator. That way that 160 mil can replace it. You will need a 13mm socket with an extension, a 6mm hex head for the supercharger, and 8mm hex head for the pulleys. The bottom of the new tensioner will connect here, and the upper portion will connect here. Here's a picture where all the bolts will be located. As shown in the picture, you can see the top bolt will be that 130 and the bottom bolt is going to be the 160. Currently it's holding the alternator in place, so you're going to need some help for it to be held while you actually remove that bolt and install a bracket. Slide the bracket with the supercharger in from right to left with the power steering reservoir out of the way. Slowly just get it lined up with those bolts and then have someone hold it while you install it. Here's the bracket installed. You're going to have one idler here and then the other idler pulley here and then the new tensioner right there. We're going to move on to mocking up the power steering reservoir. We're going to install the belt, and then we're going to see what the new hose is going to look like routed underneath the supercharger. Next you'll see the diagram of the routing of the serpentine belt. Ensure all the slack is at the tensioner. Here's what the new serpentine belt's going to look like once you got it installed. Once you do that, go ahead and reinstall the AC belt. The power steering hose has been routed underneath the supercharger. It's going to work perfectly. We're just going to need to cut the hose to make it properly fit. We mocked up the piping and we saw that we needed to make more space, and the biggest issue was the heating core sensor that was located right here. It was in the way of the blow-off valve properly fitting, so what we did was pull it off the bracket, then we removed it from the hoses, we shortened the hoses, and then reconnected the sensor. Then we extended the wires so that it could fit all the way to the back. When it was originally connected, it ran from right here directly to the top of the sensor. Overall, it freed up a lot of space, and now it's going to be a lot easier to install the piping. That was part 1. We're going to pick up part 2 of this video with the installation of the piping. Thanks for watching. Part 2 will be out shortly. If you have any questions, go ahead and comment. Let me know what you think, and go ahead and smash that subscribe.